Hello, everybody, welcome back. I'm the Strategy Professor, and today we're going to be doing our tier list for 11-15. So, as always, if you enjoy the content, please be sure to like and subscribe. It really helps out a ton on the channel. It's just a couple of clicks. It's free. It's easy. So, please help out. Make those couple of clicks. Then we also have lots of other content as well. We've got in-depth patch notes, and then I'm going to do a tier list for AD carry and probably jungle as well on this patch over the next couple of days. So, check that out. And then we're also doing playthroughs of Total War Warhammer Legendary campaigns again. So check that out, dozens and dozens of campaigns there. And then we're also covering some MMOs. We're doing Burning Crusade streams every Wednesday starting around 9:30, usually going until about midnight p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And I'll play a Restoration Druid there, TBC Classic. And then we're also going to be doing some Final Fantasy XIV content as well. So be sure to check all that out. Okay, let's go ahead and get in here. And we also have lots of topical guides as well for League, like best one trick, how to macro better, how to micro better, what is dodging, when should you dodge, what is toxicity, how can you avoid toxicity in your games, just dozens and dozens of topical guides as well. Okay, so I think that, and remember this tier list is also calibrated to be, somewhere between like silver and maybe low diamond or so, other tier lists might be calibrated a little bit differently if you're looking at pro play or like masters and challenger play, or if something's looking at like iron and bronze play, it might be a little bit different, but I'm trying to aim for that kind of mid to maybe upper mid kind of elo bracket here. Okay, so I think that Lulu overall is probably going to be the most powerful support. Now there are some matchups where she's not as good, but especially in solo queue right now, she just complements so many of the strong champions so well, and so many of the items still just work exceptionally well with her. So if you pair her together with any sort of hyper carry, a Jinx, a Twitch, just anything that wants to auto attack a lot, and scales really hard off of that. It's Kog'Maw notoriously is very good with Lulu. If you have one of those champions with a Lulu, it just puts a tremendous amount of pressure on the enemy team to have some sort of engage and to be able to lock down and kill your AD carry, because if they don't, you're just going to win. If you have like a Lulu Cog at like 2 items, it's over pretty much every team fight. And so she just puts a tremendous amount of pressure on the enemy team comp and the enemy team execution to be able to dive your backline, and she makes it hard to do that, because not only does she buff up these champions a ton with her W and with her on attack damage from her passive, but her ultimate just gives an instant infusion of health that gets around grievous wounds. And then she's got her shield, which also gets around grievous wounds, and then of course she has the polymorph with the W, which can be up to a 2.5 second point click, basically stun. You can still like waddle around, as a critter, but she just puts a ton of pressure to make the enemy execute a dive comp really well, and she just has a lot of disruption to stop their game plan. So really strong in those circumstances, but she's also pretty good if your team just has a bunch of divers yourself. So if you've got a Hecarim or a Darius, or does anyone else that benefits really heavily from move speed, you can just slap a Shurelya's on her with the W and just boost your team in there. So she doesn't have hard engage herself, but she enables other engagers to get in there and start a fight. And then of course she has her ultimate for that knock up to go with that, and then it's got an AoE slow around it, so you can use it defensively to protect your backline from dives, but you can also use it offensively to add an extra piece of CC and a really long slow as well to them, and you can overheal them as well, so you can do that proactively, use that ult on a dive if you want to, and not have to worry about overhealing, because the health that you give them can go over the top as well, and it's on a really low cooldown. I forgot exactly, see if it says it here. Yeah, it's 110 to start with and goes down from there, versus someone like a a Recon ult or a Nautilus ult is going to be like 130 to start. So really low cooldowns. And then her trading early on is not that bad either. When you combine your E plus your Q, it's pretty decent poke, and then your auto attacks themselves get a lot of extra damage for the early game for an enchanter because of your passive. So pretty good at trading early, scales really well with hyper carry, auto attackers on your team, scales pretty well with engaged champions on your team. So really the only things against her is she's squishy, of course. If you get a hold of her, she's going to die. If she gets flanked or if she face checks bushes later on in the game, she's probably going to die. So she does not have a lot of mobility. She does not have a lot of defensive tools other than just using the shields and the ult on herself, which is okay in some circumstances, but still a little on the squishy side. And then your ranges are pretty short as well. Your E range is only 650, I believe, on the shield versus someone like a Janna who's got 800 range on her shield. And then her polymorph is similarly about 600 range. It's not saying there, but she's pretty short range, which just means you're going to be closer to the fight, closer to the action, which means that someone could switch off of, you know, one person and go onto you to kill you, or you just couldn't get hit by a bunch of collateral damage. If they have a huge AoE from a Zig ult or something like that, you could get hit by that stuff. So overall, really strong right now. Her win rate's not like too insane. It's only like 51%, but her ban rate is extremely high. It's like 40% ban rate. This be 44. I think she's one of the most banned champions in the game right now. Yeah, literally the most banned champion. So you're probably not going to get to play her a lot, but she just synergizes so well with so many different champs out there that I think she is number one, and that ban rate suggests that there's something going on there. She is annoying to play against, so there is that. People could just maybe not want to play against her, but overall, I think she has a lot of power in her kit in solo queue, in that sort of silver to platinum range. Now, in like pro and challenger, she falls off a little bit because she is squishy for the reasons that I mentioned. She can get exploited if she's camped, but overall, she's good. And then Leona's the next one, and she's kind of just really taken over in top-end play and like pro play and challenger play. She's had one of the highest win rates for numerous patches now. But she just brings so much CC to the table, and she's super tanky, especially in the early game. And she's probably the premier champ at starting fights. So she has great engage, great sustained CC, and then really strong durability. And her damage is like not bad, especially in team fights where you have multiple abilities that can put your sunlight proc on multiple champions. You can get that passive really cranking out a lot of damage early on. One of the big keys to her success, kind of like Lulu, she has a really low cooldown ultimate, even less than Lulu. So it's 90 seconds at level 1. Again, compared to something like Nautilus, who's I think is 130 or 140 at level 1, you're going to be able to use this a lot more often. Now, they can dash or flash out of this, so you have to be careful how you use it. Ideally, you wait on them to use their mobility, and then you go for this. But more and more people are also sort of moving back towards these low mobility champs. You're seeing a lot of Varus. You're seeing Ashe is becoming popular right now, which I disagree with. I'll talk about that in the 80 carry video, but someone on stream told me about that, and you know, people are trying out these new builds with Ashe, and these champions that, you know, are not Ezreal and are not Vayne. Those champs are still strong, but you're seeing a resurgence of these immobile 80 carries that are squishy, and she just blasts them. And she can engage through the minion wave as well, which is really important. She can get access to that back line even during the laning phase super well, because all of her abilities go through the wave. And even if you have a tank later on in the game trying to body block for her, trying to body block your E, you always go to the back person on the E. So just extremely good at diving. Now, the main problem with her has always been and remains that she has no reverse gear. So she has to go all the way over to them, whereas Nautilus will meet them halfway, and then Thresh doesn't have to go if he doesn't want to, if the situation starts to go south. She's going all in. And she has virtually no escapes. So she is very vulnerable to getting counter ganked, to getting flanked, and if you fall behind or your team just is feeling really hesitant, then you're going to die a lot when you go in. So that can be kind of rough. Her scaling is also not fantastic. I mean, the CC never really goes out of style, but she doesn't have any AP scaling in terms of like damage or nothing meaningful. She has a little bit, but you're not going to be building AP on her. Doesn't have any plus healing and shielding. And really doesn't buff up your allies in any sort of appreciable way like a Lulu would, with the ability to put picks on your ally for that extra auto attack damage. So she is good, but it's just kind of the same old story. You can snowball super well with her because you have such low cooldowns and tons of CC, so you can always just slap Moe boots on her if you start losing bot lane and, you know, try to roam middle or try to get some deep vision and make plays on the enemy jungle with your jungler or something like that. So she does have a lot of options, and she's still going to be a very strong choice. Okay, and then Rakan, the TSP special, of course. I've seen some tier lists that have him down in D tier. That's ridiculous. He's so strong right now. I mean, if you look at Pro, obviously this is not analyzing Pro, but he's had a high win rate for numerous patches in Pro. And in solo queue, yeah, he only has like a 50% win rate. But, I mean, Lulu and Leona are not that much higher, right? They're like 51%. And so it's not that big of a difference win rate-wise. And especially considering the fact that he's really hard to play. And there are a lot of people that play him that don't really maximize his potential. And Xayah just did get buffed on this patch, so we'll see how that pans out. I haven't looked to see what her win rate is, but people will certainly be trying to play her more. I guess her win rate hasn't really gotten that much better, but people are going to try to play her more, which does make him a little bit better. It gives you much more jump range whenever someone plays Xayah. But why Recon? What's up with him? Well, if you've watched my channel for any length of time, I play Recon the most, and he just brings a lot to the table if you're really well practiced on him and if you're making the right decisions. One downside to Recon is that you can get punished pretty hard if you make bad decisions. So if you get hard CC'd or you miss your W or you go out of range of your ally and you can't jump back, he can be really squishy and he can get blown up. So his damage early on is okay. It's not insane. With the W max, it's pretty good. His wave clear is pretty decent as well, but you do have to use your mobility. You have to use your W if you want that wave clear. So you don't want to do it too often unless you're just about to take a back or unless you are in a dominant position of the lane and you're just trying to push to go put pressure on Dragon or get wards or something like that. But he has a ton of mobility, so he's very good at dodging a lot of other champions out there. I know Blitzcrank's going to be really popular on this patch. He's very good in a Blitzcrank. So he's good at dodging skill shots, getting deep vision, and being able to jump over walls to get out. So he's one of the best vision champions in the game just because he's so safe. He's very resilient to getting camped or getting ganked. He can almost always get out of everything. He has pretty good tools to get your allies out too. So you can go in, like knock them up with your W. And then you've got your shield for your allies as well. And that's one of the big things that I think distinguishes him from other engaged champions is he is very good at engaging, but he's also probably the best at counter-engaging as well, because that shield is just the fact that you can put this big shield on your ally and that you also have the engage with your W is just tremendous against any sort of assassins, your Zeds, your Fizzes, and that type of stuff. But also, if you just roll up to a fight and it's close and you just flash in E for the shield, give them your Guardian shield as well, and then W, knock up, heal them, hit them with your Q, and then shield them again. That's enough to turn around most fights. So he's very, very good at hiding in the shadows, having someone bait for him, and then you come out of the shadows, you know, with your Moby boots, your Ionian boots, and you just completely turn the fight around. So really, really good counter engager. And he scales reasonably well too. He's got the shielding, so he does scale with healing and shielding power. You don't usually get a lot of items like that, but it does open up the possibility for something like a redemption third item if you want. And it's just a lot of different variations to him. You can go Moby Boots and roam a little bit more. You can go Ionians and try to get more ultimates for big plays. So it's just a really strong mixture of healing, shielding, disruption, and mobility. So I think he's fantastic in the current meta. Again, you just have to play him correctly. And I have recently gone back to the Relic Shield. I was doing Spell Thieves early, which does give you the mana regen. It does allow you to go for more aggressive Ws. But in the ELO I'm playing in right now, it's just Platinum. I was as high as Diamond last season, but we've had a rough season this time. A lot of people just do not follow up well with your W, and that's another thing that's a little bit of a downside of Recon is people can't really tell when you're committing to an all-in or not because it looks the same. You know, if you go in with Leona, people know you're going all in. Like, there is no poke on Leona, or like Nautilus, right? Even Thresh has some visual cues, right? You land your hook, and then they can see if you're going all in or not because you take the hook. If you take the hook, it's an all in. If you don't take the hook, it's not an all in. But because Recon can go back out with his E, people will get confused because they'll see you go in with your W, and then sometimes people will just overcommit to the fight. And when you didn't intend to do that, right? You just wanted to knock them up, get an auto attack, get a Q, and then get back out and do a poke, and then your ADC like flashes forward as Vayne, into melee with Samira or something like that, and it goes south. And then they're just like, why didn't you commit? Why didn't you commit? And his cooldowns are really long early on, and I think a lot of people don't understand that. Like, they're used to playing with a Leona or something, and they think you've got like a 9-second cooldown on your W. It's 18 seconds at level 1. It's very, very long. It's like basically a Blitzcrank hook. So that can be a little confusing, especially in the early game and the laning for your allies. So I found Relic Shield is useful because you get those guaranteed procs. So you get your wards really early, and like I said, he's one of the best at getting deep vision, so getting that early to track the enemy jungler is really nice. But also I've just kind of dialed it back on the hard trades early because, like I said, his damage is okay, it's not insane, and then you're just less likely to bait your teammates. So if it's a really obvious poke, if you want to, go for it, but I've kind of dialed back the trading a little bit in the early game just because it just doesn't end up well. Either, ally will sit there and watch you and not do anything, or like worst case scenario, actually back up out of your E range, or they'll overcommit and die. So it doesn't mean that you shouldn't be poking all the time, but that you should be maybe a little bit more discerning in the places where you choose to go in. And when I have spell thieves, I just feel like I need to be poking every time on cooldown just to get my ward procs and just to put up some damage on them. But sometimes, I'll try to force it when my ally is clearly, just not being aggressive. And it doesn't matter if it's the right thing to do. Yes, if it's higher elo, if it's diamond or whatever, people are going to be pushed up and they're going to get good trades when you do that. But sometimes it's the just farm meta, in platinum, especially if somebody's auto-filled. And anyways, I just feel like Relic Shield just gives you more stability in where you're getting your wards, how I've practiced recently, and it just doesn't, it doesn't tempt you into making a potentially bad play based on how your ally is, managing the lane, just so you can get your procs, right? You don't feel that pressure to have to do that. So anyways, that's a couple of adjustments that I've made, and it seemed to be working out pretty well yesterday when I made that switch back to Relic Shield. And that's what a lot of high-end people do, is they do the Relic Shield. There are still some that do Spell Thieves, and I think if you're in a really aggressive lane that can have a lot of poke, or where you're doing a lot of all-ins, it can be good, but you can still all-in with Relic Shield. You just run out of mana a bit faster. So you just can't be doing it all the time. But anyways, I still think Rakan's really good. Shouldn't come as a surprise to anyone on the channel. Okay, moving down a little bit here. I think that Yuumi is still really strong and probably one of the more underrated supports, especially in this bracket, this silver to, low diamond, high platinum bracket. Because if you don't, first of all, Lulu's banned most of the time, so she's off the table. I do think she's really strong. But I think one of the next best things can be Yuumi. She buffs up her allies so much. It's actually very similar to Lulu in the sense that she gives movement speed to people, and she gives extra attack speed, and she's got a heal built into her kit. Now that heal is not as resilient as Lulu's shield because it is reduced by grievous wounds, and there's gonna be a lot of grievous wounds in games because healing is just out of control right now. It's just really OP that so many of the super powerful items like Divine Sunder, Gore Drinker, Shield Bow, and Conquer, and just baseline abilities on many of the meta champions right now just give a ton of healing. So you can bet just about, 2 or 3 people on the enemy team at all times are going to have like a Thorn Mail or a Putrefier or Executioner. They're going to have some grievous wounds. So healing is a little bit worse than it would be in a lot of normal metas just because there's so much, and you just don't need the healing as much, right? Like, it's good, but if you're already on a champ that, has Conquer plus those items I just mentioned, the healing's good, but your champ's already going to have a lot of healing. So healing in general right now from the support role just has a little bit less value than it normally would because it's so prevalent. People can get it so easily from other items and runes, and there's just so much encouragement for the enemy team to build grievous wounds. But anyways, she's still really strong for that reason. She's very difficult to kill late game, especially if you're attached to a bruiser. So she's really, really good with these 1v9 champions, these Gore Drinker, Stride Breaker, Divine Sunder type of champs, right? If you have a fed Viego, Irelia, any of those types of things, and you slap a Yumi on there when she's got 1 or 2 items, and it's just almost impossible to deal with it because of that. And she has a really nice ultimate as well. It's excellent for team fights, just completely locking people down. They can't really stop you from using it either. So yes, it is channeled, but you can do it when you're attached to people. And pro tip, you can do that even when your person is CC'd. So even if your person Zanya's or they get hit by a Bard ult or something, you can still use the Yumi ultimate through there, which is a pretty weird interaction, but I've done that a few times as Yumi. So she's able to bypass some mechanics like that. And then the fact that you are squishy as an enchanter, but when you're attached to people a lot, you're really not that squishy. So that bypasses some of the problems enchanters have had in the past. And the fact that you don't have to get boots basically gives you 950 free gold towards your first mythic item, which is really underrated and very, very strong. So basically, your first item is going to cost like 1550 gold, which is obviously going to be very, very strong. So she can use Staff of Flowing Water. Now it's saying Moonstone here. I feel like Shirelia's is probably still a better bet. Yeah, Shirelia's does have a higher win rate. They did buff Moonstone recently, but I still think it's a bait. It just takes way too long to come online and requires very specific items. Like, you really need to be getting Redemption to take full advantage of that, because she only has 1 heal in her kit. It's like, it's okay, but to really get a lot out of the extra plus healing and shielding, you need to have Redemption most of the time. And right now in the meta, it's like, it's an okay item in some situations, but there are a lot of times where you're going to want to go for something like, Staff of Flowing Water, Ardent Censer, or Putrefier on her. So I really don't like the Moonstone. I've tried it out. It's really underwhelming. Shirelia's, it did get nerfed, but it's still really, really good because you can just hop whenever you jump around to different people in team fights. That counts as interacting with them and gives you the movement speed. But also just like running the lane with someone, you can deattach and then just reattach to them every 4 seconds to get that extra little bit of bonus movement speed, which doesn't seem like a lot, but it does add up. You might get back to the lane 3 or 4 seconds faster, and sometimes that means you catch a wave or you don't. So she is really good in that sense. Now, she still has the same old weaknesses she's always had, right? Where she's probably one of the worst warders in the game, because you not only are you really squishy, but you have no escapes and you don't even have boots most of the time. So you have to have an ally go with you to ward, and in solo queue, sometimes that just doesn't happen, right? Especially kind of the lower you go in elo brackets. So her warding's pretty rough. She can't really roam, and she just does not have good matchups in a lot of 2v2s. Like, if you're against something like Ezreal, it's pretty good, but if they have any sort of point-click CC, like Leona is terrible. I guess it's not point-click, or like Thresh, if he flays you. There's a lot of stuff that can feel really bad if you can't unattach to land your auto attacks to get more mana. So she's really, really strong in the mid to late games. Just her early game's pretty garbage, and her warding and roaming are pretty bad, but overall she can still be good. Now, Maokai, I think, is still pretty strong. Now, his win rate has gone down, but I do think that going for, this Comet plus Mandate is a really good poke setup for later. So if the enemy team has a lot of, like, squishy champions and they don't have a lot of healing on their team, then that can be really strong. Now, if they do have healing, if they have a Soraka, or they have a bunch of lifesteal or whatever, maybe it's not going to be quite as effective, but just going for that straight Mandate into Demonic Embrace just gives you such a supreme amount of poke. We're almost always going to be second in damage, maybe third sometimes, but you're going to be doing a lot of damage as a support. And then he has a lot of CC as well, right, with his ultimate, just a really hard to dodge in team fights. He has his point-click W, so for any time, your jungler's there, you can just flash W on somebody and they're probably dead. So really good CC, really good damage scaling. So if you need an AP champion that is going to bring a lot of CC to the table, and he also has supreme vision control as well with those seeds, then he's going to be your man. So I think he is really good. He does have high base stats as well. So for a mage, in quotes, who does pretty high magic damage, he still gets, the armor and the health and the magic resist of a tank, pretty much. So he's naturally pretty resilient for a lot of these all-ins early. The main problem with him is he doesn't, it's hard for him to personally engage without, like, someone else being there. And some champions have mechanics that can nullify his seeds quite a lot. So, like, Zyra, for example, if she spawns a plant in a bush, it, will consume your seeds. My answer to that, usually when people ask about that, is it's like, okay, but usually they're using resources to deal with that, and your seeds are on a lower cooldown. If they have, like, mobility boots and they just walk up and get the seed to run after them, they can play that little game. But you can basically create a zone of control where it just makes it so difficult for the enemy to come in and engage you, especially if you're setting up for dragons or barons or whatever. The Thresh can run in and out and, bait your seeds or whatever, but meanwhile, you guys are just doing the dragon or doing the baron, right? So even if they do have some answers to get around it, you can still deal with it. And a lot of people are not building a ton of magic resist. The spirit visages and whatever that other item is. I can't remember the name of it, that, like, Skarner, Force of Nature, that, like, Skarner and Udyr would get. It's, like, really, really good against the seeds. People just aren't building that because so many teams are heavily stacked with physical damage right now that a lot of people just aren't building a ton of magic resist. So that's another thing is, if your comp needs some magic damage in the bot lane, he's probably the number one mage I'd go to right now. Zyra can be pretty good, especially as you start getting closer to silver, but Maokai's just so well-rounded, and he's just so unique with that build that it's poke, it's supreme vision, but it's also really good CC and pretty respectable base stats. Now, there is a tank build you can get with him as well if you want to get Dead Man's Plate. They did buff that up recently a little bit, but it's still a shadow of its former self before the nerfs a few patches ago. And then after Dead Man's, it starts to get a little sketchier. Like, you can get Abyssal Mask, but I just think the AP version is really what makes him unique. If you want to do the Dead Man's Plate type of stuff, I'd say probably just play Leona or play something else that has really good engage. Sometimes your first pick Maokai and you just don't know what to do, and you can do AP or you can do the tank style. That is one strength of him, is that he can flex to both depending on what your team does if you're an early pick, but overall, I wouldn't do it. Now, he can go Locket as well, so if you just want to do like a peeler tank style, you can just do like Locket Thornmail or Abyssal Mask, and both of those could be okay. Okay, Thresh. Now, Thresh did get nerfed on this patch, and his win rate fell a little bit harder than I thought it would. It was like 1.5%, almost 2% off of the Flay. So the Flay is now 13 seconds, and I believe that's what you level last in a lot of situations. This is saying that you level it second. I'm not sure about that. I feel like Lantern leveling is so much stronger because the Lantern gives 2 shields, one to you, one to the other person. It can help people reposition. It can give you vision of stuff if you need to, like in a bush. I would just probably max Lantern, but some people are maxing your E here, which increases your slow, but I guess it does increase the damage a little bit. I don't know. Maybe people are incentivized to go for the E second now after the nerfs, but either way, he's still pretty good. Now, the obvious strength of Thresh is his flexibility, right? Because you can do offense, obviously, with your hooks. You can take them, flay. You can use your Lantern offensively to pull an ally in once you've snared somebody and you're in a winning situation. But he also has really good defense, right? Where you can flay back mobility, which is a great skill check on Thresh. You know, he can flay back Leonas or Recons or even like an Alistar engage if you're fast enough. So that is very useful. And then, of course, you have your ultimate, which is a massive slow. It's just really hard for your team or for the enemy team to dive through that. And then, of course, the Lantern to get people out of hot situations as well. So he's just really good at sort of helping your allies position in fights and sort of dictating how the fight's going. The big downside, and then whenever I play Thresh, you know, I'll run into this, is if they have a really strong backline, you don't have any backline access, right? Aside from just hitting a miracle hook on the Jinx that's really fed or something, you're not going to be able to interact with AD carries in the same way that like Leona can, you know, with her ultimate just diving straight onto the backline, or Rakan just, you know, running at him and just flash Wing, you know, disrupting that backline. You just don't have that. You don't have that really big, you know, boom button, or like the really big, like just dive in button, right? So you're good at sort of goofing around with the front line unless you can catch them out, like you're hiding in a bush or something and, you know, the Jinx bush checks you. But he does have a harder time than other champions getting access to that backline. Nautilus also has like his ultimate, which, you know, is going to hit the people on the back. So he is good, but against a really strong backline like a Lulu Kog'Maw, Lulu Jinx, you know, or even just something like Ezreal, you don't have a way to interact with him. And it can feel bad, right? If your only target's to hook in a fight are like Mundo and, you know, something else borderline unkillable on the front line, that can feel kind of rough. So if you do hard dominate early, if you get your flash plays and your hooks and you snowball really hard, he can be good. But just look at this chart. He just precipitously drops like off a cliff into the mid game. And he can get some utility items. That is a saving grace for him, right? He can get Locket plus Redemption, which does help you out a lot in fives. But your target access is very, very limited compared to, you know, some of the other champs that we looked at. I don't know how Leona's chart went. She probably falls off a little bit too. She holds in there pretty well until like 35 or 40 minutes where she gets outscaled. But you can see she holds up better. And then I think Recon, just for a comparison for engaged champs, tends to do far better. So he's a lot weaker early, but then over time he gets far stronger just because he has that backline access and has scaling items that he can get as well. So anyways, Thresh, very sort of early game oriented, and a lot of people don't think of him that way, but if you've played him a decent chunk, you really have to snowball on him hard. So that's why I have him down a little bit. Like, if you're really good on him, you can make him work, but he has been nerfed, and he does require a hard snowball, which can be tricky in a meta where you're seeing lots of Ezreals and Vaynes, and you do have some of those immobile champs, right? You've got the Varus's and the Ashes, but there's still a lot of mobility out there, and there's a lot of, you know, borderline unkillable Sterix users as well. Okay. Blitzcrank, fresh off the buffs here. I did go ahead and bump him up from tier 1 to tier 2. I mean, they just doubled down on how good he is at, you know, what he does, which is hooking people and blowing them up. So, again, if you're playing against Ashe, who's going to be popular this patch for whatever reason, pro guides and those people have found some, you know, YOLO Q Ashe build with like Wit's End or something, and everyone's wanting to try it out. Then you got Varus everywhere in pro. People want to try it out in solo queue. That just looks delicious for Blitz to hook those targets, right? Or Lulu or Janna. A lot of champs are really good hook targets. Even some of the tanks in the very early game, if you land a hook on an Alistar or a Leona and you combo them in your minion wave, sometimes you can still kill them, even though those matchups obviously later on aren't that great. So kind of like Thresh, he sort of has a hard time with target access later on. You know, hooking the Alistar, hooking the Mundo, not necessarily the best, but at least he puts up really big damage on him. Like much more than Thresh. Thresh has almost no damage late game. Early game, pretty strong damage with his empowered like auto attacks. But later in the game, his damage is going to be a lot less burst on a single target than Blitzcrank. Another thing that's really useful about Blitzcrank, which a lot of people might be sleeping on, is his ultimate completely removes shields first and then does damage. So if they have that Sterix and you time your ult right, you can remove that Sterix off of them, which is huge. Or the, I want to say Bloodline, that's the shield bow. You can remove the shield on shield bow, obviously something like a Lulu shield, Set shield. A lot of different champions have various shielding components right now. So Guardian, Locket, you know, being able to remove a Locket shield, like, you know, Thresh or Leona or somebody uses Locket, which is very, very common on those champions. You just wait for it and then just boom, pop your ult. It removes the shield and does quite a bit of damage on top of it. So he does have some utility for the shield breaking, but a lot of it's still just going to come down to you hit the hook and you feel like a god, or you miss it and you feel worthless. So you got to make sure that you're landing those hooks if you're going to play him. Now, a lot of people are still going with the Guardian build, which makes sense. Just gives you a little bit more utility, a little bit more defense. You could go something like Electrocute, I guess, if you really wanted to like crank up the damage. But you pretty much just want mobility boots, and that's kind of the only item that you need in the game. And then you just run around and try to land hooks on people. So they did increase the damage by 20 per hit, and he also does have larger AP ratio. So in theory, I guess, I don't know, you could try some kind of AP build on him. I don't know what that would look like. I guess maybe, how does that item do? The thing with the ice on it? Yeah, this Everfrost. It has a much, much lower win rate than Locket or Shurelya's, but that could be a cute interaction. It would give you a bit more utility if you can't kill them in one full rotation. You could Everfrost them, or you could just run up and Everfrost them first and then hook them after that. I don't know. There might be some fun things you can do with that, but you're going to be really squishy if you go for that build, and it's a very expensive build. It's 3,200. That's why, like, so many fun things and fun builds in the game, people ask me, oh, could you do this? Could you do Everfrost on Recon or something? And I've tried it, but there's just such a massive difference as a support on a support budget between 2,500 gold and 3,200 gold that you just kind of have to go the 2,500 gold items, if at all possible. So I think Shurelya's or Locket could be pretty good on him. But, yeah, not much has changed aside from the fact that your hook is going to hit a little bit harder and has a little bit more AP scaling. I think they gave him like 3 more armor or something too. So in some of those all-in situations, you're going to be a little bit better, in the early levels. But overall, it's the same deal. Okay, then we've got Rel. Now I'm moving Rel up a little bit more. I don't know. I think her win rate has not gone up that much, but she got a pretty hefty buff on this patch. So it went from 13 seconds cooldown static on her W down to 11, which is going to be, obviously really good. Her pick rate is going up a ton, and it looks like her win rate is going up quite a bit too. So Rel still has a really nice kit. It's just her numbers were, knocked down a lot. Kind of like Blitzcrank, she has her Q that can break those shields, which is really good in the meta right now if you time it correctly. And then you have her W where you can get the stun, or you can charge people, get the flip into the stun off of your E. So you have the potential for like lots of AoE disruption from doing your stomp, hitting people AoE, using your E, stunning people AoE, and then using your ult to kind of hold people in place if they don't have any mobility left. And again, against these immobile champions that do not have a dash to get out of your ult, that's a really long piece of extra CC. So, she is good. She is durable. She's very good against Recon, just because anytime he tries to go in on the AD carry, you just press E and he's stunned, basically, because he's going to be within that little box. So she's pretty good against divers, specifically Recon. And a lot of the items, the tank items, are still going to be really strong, right? Like Locket just hasn't been touched in a million years. It's still one of the best, if not the best, support item, especially on tanks. And so she's good with it, and she's good against it by being able to break that shield. And then Zeke's is still going to be pretty strong on her. So not a lot of new technology in terms of her builds, but the fact that you can W much more often is going to be quite a big deal on her. Okay. Oh, camera's freaking out there. There we go. Okay, we'll do a few more. I do want to keep this under an hour. I do need to get over to the stream here in a minute. Bard is still pretty good. I know that we've had some people on the channel that really like Bard, like Gunpowder Mills. Shout out. So he's still pretty good. He does have a pretty strong win rate, like 52%, which is nice. And people are going back towards this kind of tankier build, which is the Locket into the Frozen Heart Frozen Heart did get a pretty good buff a few patches ago. Not a lot of champs really fit into their build, but it does work for Bard because he needs to get up close and land his auto attacks to really do any damage, and they're short range, so like 500 range. So that means you're going to be getting hit by the enemy quite a bit. And there are a lot of physical damage dealers out there, so having the extra armor and the extra ability to slow down their auto attacks is nice. And you get the ability haste out of it, which is something that he obviously likes because, more ults means, more playmaking. So that is solid. Locket, of course, we just talked about. It's really OP on pretty much everybody. So he's good. If you can get your Moby boots and get out there and roam and start making plays. Ionian boots, ironically, do have a 4% higher win rate, though, because you can make more plays with your ult. So that might be worth considering. But yeah, just kind of a tanky build. Deadman's is still pretty strong, so not much in the way of like new stuff with Bard. With the prevalence of more of these squishy champs, which I keep saying, that makes him better. Less Gale Forces, less Ezreals, less Vaynes means that Bard's going to prosper in that type of environment. And even some of the junglers aren't as mobile, right? Like Diana's kind of mobile, but not really. Viego sort of mobile, but not really. So he does have a lot of good targets for his ult these days. Just in terms of, the very basic hit a person, go kill him. Then, of course, you have a lot more you can do with the, the complex situations, right? Like ulting towers to stop Rift Heralds, using your ult to stop, like, Fizzes or Karthus ults or whatever, alley-ooping your Fiddlesticks or your Kennen, right, whenever they come in, if they don't have their Hourglass. Like, there's a lot of cool applications for that. I guess if you hit them, you're probably going to make the people immune to damage, though, in that situation. So maybe not the best, unless you can just, like, absolutely just barely clip your own person and not save the other people. To give him a free Hourglass. But there's a lot of skill expression with Bard, and he can be really fun to play. But I think that there's just a lot of kind of gray area and sort of what ifs with him versus some of these other champs that I feel like their power is a bit more certain. Okay, Alistar is another one that I think is pretty good. He gets kind of underappreciated and lost in the shuffle when people were thinking about like Leona, because she's going to be stronger in a lot of generalized situations, and maybe even Nautilus at really high level play. But Alistar is still pretty respectable. He does have the combo, which people are familiar with, the WQ, and then you can maybe E and run people down. But something that's underappreciated about him as well is that he can heal through these poke lanes, and so many supports right now are playing like your Xerath, Lux, Vel'Koz, just a ton of these poke champs, and he has that innate sustain built into his kit that heals both you and your ally. So that can be really strong in a poke sort of lane. And he can also tower dive super early with his R. So he does bring a little bit to the table that other champs don't. So just the fact that a lot of these poke champs are so prevalent right now makes me want to put him up a little bit higher. Now his range is a lot more limited than something like a Leona. Leona can open on people from, I think it's like 1,200 units away with her R, versus Alistar has to be, I think it's like 650 for his headbutt. So that is kind of rough range wise, but and he's all in just like Leona, so if the situation goes south, you're probably dead. But he's all right. So I just have him up there just kind of as a meta call, as sort of your anti-poke hard engage champ. Rakan's also pretty decent against poke because he has that repeatable shield, and he can also heal himself and his ally if you hit your Qs. Although if you go for Relic Shield, you're not going to be able to chuck as many of your Qs. But either way, let's look at Zyra here. So Zyra was up quite a bit when they buffed the mage items last patch. She did go up a couple of percentage points. She's down a little bit on this patch. But she's still pretty good. I mean, 3,200 is a lot better than 3,400 for your support items. I would say that Night Harvester is... I think it's still really good on her. I don't know what the win rates are, but that item's just naturally 3,200 anyways. Yeah, it's got a 4% higher win rate than Leandri's, so Leandri's has kind of become a bait item because it does cost the same. I guess, I mean, you do get 600 free mana, which is definitely a thing, but you don't get the health And this is just adds more burst, I think, versus Leandri's. The fact that there is so much lifesteal out there right now, people can just kind of lifesteal off of minions or whatever through Leandri's. This also gives you movement speed, so you can reposition a little bit better in fights. Now, both of them give the ability haste, so I guess that doesn't matter. So Leandri's is still fine, especially if you go Leandri's Demonic. Like, that is a good combination, but I'm just saying, like, the main thing I'm trying to say is I think that the buff did not do quite as much as it may have seemed, the 200 gold off, because Night Harvester was already a good option. So I guess it is a little bit better, like I said, with the Leandri's build against, like, tanky champs, but a lot of people just are not playing, like, full-on tanks that have a lot of HP. I don't know. I guess, like, the Sterix, like the DS, Divine Sunder plus Sterix still does give you a lot of health, so I don't know. Either way, she's okay. She puts down a lot of poke in the laning phase. She's really good at vision because she can spawn her plants in brush. They are not shut off by control wards, as I always remind people. So she's and they protect you while you're trying to, kill control wards. They can eat skill shots, so she's very good against Blitzcrank because you can just spawn your plants in front of Blitz, just throw an E at him with a plant in front of him. A lot of times Blitzcrank will try to respond when you hit him with an E by countering with a hook. He'll just hook the plant instead. So, really, really good. If you're really on it, you can shield your allies with the plant as well. Now, that's a little trickier to do because your E moves super slowly and your Q has a delay on it, but if you're really gangster and a Blitzcrank's running after your Ashe, you can spawn a Q plant to block the hook, which is pretty nice, but I think there's not enough mechanics like that in the game that are really fun. You used to be able to do that with Malzahar minions as well until they put a delay on them. But anyways, she's good. She has a lot of poke. There are some tricks you can do if you're really a seasoned Zyra player, like using the plants to block things or to control vision. She puts out a ton of damage in team fights, so that's pretty good. The downside is that her items are very expensive, and if she gets flanked in the mid game, walking up river, or the Hecarim just gets behind your team in a team fight, she's just going to get annihilated. So she has no mobility, no survivability. So that can be pretty rough. But if you're just looking for a ton of AP damage, lots of burst in a team fight, she's your girl. I still would probably prefer Maokai. He's going to have less consistent poke early, but he's a little more durable, brings more consistent CC, and has even better vision control than she does. But she's going to have more burst, and she's going to have more damage if she goes unchecked in a 5v5 fight. Last couple here. Sona, still pretty good. Not a ton to say here. I don't think there's a lot of new builds. I think Shurelya's is still the way to go. On Sona, even though it has been nerfed, like Moonstone can still be alright. Let's see what the win rates are. Yeah. People just getting baited by the Moonstone buffs, but Shurelya's is still 3% higher. So, especially if you're in silver or kind of lower elo brackets, if you just go unchecked and you just spam Q and lane just to get a lot of free poke with Aerie and Scorch, like, that's enough to win lane against a lot of people, especially if they're not playing Leona or something with really hard engage. If they're playing these little poke champs, the Vel'Kozes and stuff like that, if you can just dodge their skill shots, they can't dodge yours because it's not a skill shot. It's just press Q. It hits people and does damage, and it's pretty cheap early on. Your W, if you do get poked, is sort of rough in the early game because it's very expensive, but as the game, goes on and you scale harder, your W puts out some of the best healing and shielding in the game. So she's really, really strong. If you get to 2 or 3 items, she's great. Now, if you do want to go like Moonstone Redemption for Supreme team fighting, you can do that. But that's just not going to offer as much to your team as Shurelya's. And most of the time, she's going to want Staff of Flowing Water as well, because with your auras, you can very easily just put this on your entire team. So it's not as good as it used to be with the movement speed, but it's still going to be pretty solid. So she's going to be one of the best if you just really want to hard dominate team fights and you don't think they're going to be able to really dive you or mess with you. She's good. She does have her ultimate to help a little bit in team fights with dives, but she's still going to be a sitting duck if you rotate around and flank her. And then Nautilus is the last one that I'll mention here. He's still pretty good. He's just a lot squishier than the other tanks. He has lower base armor, and his defensive steroid, his W, is pretty anemic early on. It's not a very big shield. It is a shield instead of like armor or magic resist, so it can get broken by Rel or Blitzcrank or whatever. And usually you max that last, versus, you know, with Leona, you're maxing your W first, which is your defensive steroid, and that also increases your damage the most. So he's just kind of in this odd spot where you kind of need to max your E if you want to do any damage in fights, but it's very mana intensive. You'll go very quickly, and that's not your engage point. So you're not going to be able to throw as many hooks, and they're not going to do as much damage. So if you max your hook, then you're not going to do any damage in team fights because you're going to have no points in your E. If you max your survivability with your W, then you're not going to have damage, and you're not going to have cooldowns for more hooks. So he's just in this odd situation where just the way that his skills are distributed, you really have to make a choice between these things. More hooks, damage, or survivability, versus, you know, a lot of champs are going to have that kind of built in. They're just going to have, like, just be better distributed to where they're going to be able to be tankier and have stronger engages. Also, like, his hook is really good open field because it's got this huge hitbox, but it's really hard in the laning phase because it can't go through minions. And also, if you're trying to hook people who are under tower and you accidentally hook the tower, or you accidentally hook a wall that's really close to the tower, it could end up very badly for you. So there is that. You can use the hook to escape. Sometimes people can block that pretty easily. A lot of times if they just cut off your angle. And you can't hook over walls. So, you know, one of the really good plays you can make as a Blitzcrank or a Thresh or even a Leona in the mid game is you get control of the mid-river bushes with, control wards, and then you ward over, some of the walls, and then you're able to engage on people. So you're able to engage on that support who's trying to walk up and ward over the wall into the river. You just grab them, boom, they're dead, right? Nautilus doesn't have that option, so that takes away a lot of your playmaking potential, especially in kind of that silver to platinum range where a lot of people will face check the river to try to get vision, and they will get hooked. So, anyways, but he does have pretty good team fighting damage if you max that E, and then his ultimate, of course, is one of the best team fighting abilities in the game. It's a knock up on multiple people. It does pretty respectable damage, and cannot be blocked. Goes through everybody. So he has some pretty good strengths, but he's got some really pronounced weaknesses as well. And that's pretty much going to be it. I mean, the last few that I'll hit on here, like I said, people are playing, the Lux, Vel'Koz, Xerath type of stuff. I'm really not sure, what's up with that. What's the craze with those champions? Because their win rates aren't that phenomenal. No. But I guess people just like to play it. Maybe it's easier to play. Like, you do have to make the skill shot, so it's hard in that sense, but you don't have to make decisions on, when to engage or not. You just kind of sit back and just chuck that. So I guess if you're a mid who's auto-filled bottom and you really don't understand matchups and you just want to hang out, a million yards away and just chuck skill shots at people, it makes sense in that situation. But that has become popular lately. I do get asked about Karma a lot, too. Why do I have her down in D tier? Why isn't she higher? The thing is, you could move her up into, maybe B, but she can be very good early if you land a lot of your poke, but she falls off pretty hard late game. Her shield and just, the numbers on that are pretty low, and she just doesn't have a lot of CC. She has delayed CC on her W. If they stand in it the whole time, she can get a root. So, it's it's okay, but I think even in solo queue, if you want to go for the push and poke thing, I would almost rather play something like a Lux or a Xerath, honestly, than a Karma. I mean, Lux has a 2-second bind on her Q, which is, if you land that, it's doomsday. The person's dead in a lot of situations. And then you've got it, you still have a pretty big shield, a bigger shield than Karma, I believe. I mean, Karma's ultimate shield, ultimate plus E, is going to be a bigger single target shield, but I feel like Lux she's going to have better wave clear, she's going to have more consistent poke, she's going to have a bigger shield, she's going to have a 2-second root, and just a really hard hitting ultimate. So, as troll as it is to say it, in solo queue, I feel like Lux is going to be better than Karma is right now, if that's, what you're in the market for. And I don't know. She's okay. The movement speed's obviously really good. If you ultimate plus shield and then use Shirelius, run your whole team in, like, that is nice. But I just think the numbers just aren't quite there, and she just doesn't have enough CC. So D might be a little harsh. You could maybe put her in B, like I said. But either way, she's not in a premier place right now, right? She's somewhere down in, like, average at best and probably a little bit below average, in my opinion. Tom Kench is another one who has come out, and you're seeing him a little bit more. Jury's still out. Maybe people just don't have the right builds. I've seen him do really well top, and I think he's winning quite a bit top, but in bot lane, it just feels like he doesn't bring enough to the table. He still feels like a peeler tank that doesn't even have his chomp anymore. He can do a lot of damage, and if you do get a knock up and you run people down, he's, pretty good as an offensive champ, especially if they don't have a dash or a flash. So, and if you have, like, an ADC that can hold him still, so like an Ashe that can slow him, or a Jhin that can hit him with his W to ensure that you're going to land your knock-up off of your W. He can have some pretty good combinations, but I just feel like he just gets destroyed in a lot of matchups. Maybe he's good against Leonas and Nautiluses and that type of stuff still, but I don't know. His no back... Well, I guess he does have backline access maybe with his W. We'll see. I mean, his win rate's pretty low right now. I know I've recommended, it's his win rate's basically the same as Recon, and obviously I love Recon a lot, not as much Tom, so I don't know, maybe I'm still just a hater on Tom, we'll have to see, but I just feel like he just doesn't quite do enough as support. Although with items in the top lane, in that 1v1 matchup against other melee champions, he can be pretty good. Anyone else is kind of making waves. Trundle, I think he can be alright, like, in the jungle and top lane into certain matchups, but as a support, I just don't think you do enough. Yeah, Pillar's cute. I don't know. His items are going to be very expensive, in my opinion, so maybe in some places he could be alright. Like, maybe as a counter to Nautilus, just because you can throw the Pillar up to block his hook. I don't know. There might be some places, but I think it's rough. But anyways, let's go ahead and call it quits there. So just come by if you have any questions about any of the other champs, or you think I overlooked somebody, or there's like some new build that, I didn't really cover here. Just let me know. I try to cover as many champs as possible. We probably got through, like 15 or something different champs. So I think that's pretty good. But yeah, if you want to know more, just stop by the stream 11:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, or leave me a comment in this video. But I'm happy to have a conversation with you on stream about it. But anyways, that's going to be it. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you enjoy the content. Check out the rest of the tier list. I should have the ADC tier list tomorrow, hopefully for you, and then I'll see if I can do the jungle tier list the next day. And check out the patch notes as well. I'll have that linked somewhere in the video, probably at the beginning, which won't make a lot of sense because you're hearing it now at the end. But check that out as well. So anyways, thank you very much. Have a good day, and we'll see you next time.